You're on mute, Chairman.
Okay, so can everyone hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so welcome everyone, and a welcome to Ronnie Alexandra, who is here as an observer. He's observing the meeting this evening on behalf of the Standards Committee. So I think we can't see Mr. Alexander, but welcome anyway. So just a few housekeeping issues first. So I have to remind everyone at the meeting today that this is being recorded via the internet and will be archived for future viewing. And can I also ask that people, when you're not speaking, to mute yourselves. And if you want to ask a question, obviously raise your hand or drop a message in the chat box. And obviously, if there are any difficulties like I've just had, please let either myself or one of the democratic officers know. Amy's here as well as Mark this evening. And if you have any problems with your webcam, please do turn it off, because often it helps with you being able to hear. So before I start the meeting proper, can I just remind everyone present of the email that we received, I think today, from the monitoring officer regarding conduct at meetings. I hope that we can all adhere to that advice and guidance, and that we can proceed with this meeting in a sort of orderly and respectful way. So firstly, are there any apologies of the meeting? I have only one apology, Mark, and that's from Bronwyn.
Yeah, I haven't anything to add at the moment, Chair.
Councillor Vince Bailey, Chair.
Thank you. And can we agree the minutes from the last meeting on the 21st of October? Taking silence to mean agreed. And are there any declarations of interest? Is that okay, Mark?
Yeah, no, there's none noted, so that's fine. Thanks, Chair.
Great. So if we go to item 4 on the agenda, which is for noting, it's a presentation from Phil and Paul, really giving us an update on the COVID business grant. So I'll hand over to you, Phil.
Actually, thank you.
Oh, Paul.
It's actually Paul first, and I'll take over halfway.
Okay, thank you, Ruba. Mark, would you be able to start the presentation? Would that be okay?
Yes, bear with me a second. I'm just putting it on now.
Just while Mark's doing that, I think I've met most of you, but I'm Paul Russell, the Operational Manager for the Exchequer Services. And part of my responsibilities cover the business rates area. So I'm going to give a short presentation on grants and reliefs for local businesses that were linked to non-domestic rates. So if we could go on to the first slide, please, Mark.
Everyone see that?
Then. Does everyone see that? Everything okay?
Yeah, you might need to just do start slideshow.
Phil, where is that? Sorry.
I think if you go.
I think your cursor was on it then, Mark. The next symbol over.
That.
That's the one.
Okay.
All right, yes, so if we could go to the next slide then, please.
Yeah, of course, bear with me a second.
Lovely. Can everyone see that? Yes. Excellent. Right then, so I'll talk about the grants that were linked to non-domestic rates and the various relief that we've assisted businesses with during the current pandemic.
Bear with me a second, sorry. Yeah, bear with me a second, sorry.
Right, thank you. So as part of the fiscal stimulus package to support businesses in Wales through the COVID-19 pandemic, Welsh ministers introduced 2 non-repayable grants that were linked to non-domestic properties. So I'll just talk through those grants. Grant 1 was a grant of £25,000, which was available for businesses operating in the retail, leisure and hospitality sectors, occupying properties with a rateable value of between 12,000 and 51,000. These included businesses such as shops, petrol stations, garden centres, travel agents, sports and leisure facilities, pubs and restaurants. Grant 2 was a £10,000 grant and was available to all businesses eligible for small business rates relief with a rateable value of 12,000 or less. The grant was limited to a maximum of two grants per organisation. As a result, as an example, if you had a business with a chain of shops within the council's area, then they would qualify for £20,000, 2 times £10,000 grants. The grant scheme opened on the 20th of March 2020 and closed on the 30th of June 2020. The council received guidance on how to operate the scheme from the Welsh Government on the 25th of March 2020. Following this, we set up a process for the receipt and processing of applications within a matter of days and made our first payment to businesses on the 31st of March for a total of £3.7 million. Further payments were subsequently made to businesses on the 2nd of April and the 7th of April, totaling £10.9 million. As a result, £14.6 million was paid to businesses within the first 2 weeks of receiving the guidance from Welsh Government. In total, we paid 2,061 grants, and the total amount paid out in those grants was £25.7 million. 2,036 of those businesses were paid £25.4 million by the closing date of the 30th of June 2020. That left 25 grants which were remaining outstanding. 22 were paid in July, 2 were paid in August, and the remaining grant was paid in October. The council delivered the scheme exceptionally quickly, paying the vast majority of businesses within 2 weeks of receipt of the application. Those where payments were delayed largely related to incomplete applications where further information was required, discrepancies with the rating list with the Valuation Office Agency, and therefore those particular issues had to be resolved with the Valuation Office Agency, or where further guidance was required from Welsh Government. We could move on to slide 2, please, Mark. The next scheme that we administered was the non-domestic rates relief scheme and was applicable to properties in the retail, leisure and hospitality sectors. The scheme's aim was to provide support for eligible occupied properties by offering a discount of 100% of the non-domestic rates bill. The scheme was applicable and applied to eligible businesses operating in the retail, leisure and hospitality sector who have business premises with a rateable value of 500,000 or below. As a result, in addition to receiving the £25,000 grant under the lockdown grant scheme, eligible businesses also had full rate relief. This was also expanded to include larger properties with rateable values of up to 500,000. Properties eligible for the relief included shops, pubs, restaurants, gyms, performance venues and hotels. The scheme is open to any qualifying business that has a rates liability for the 2020-21 financial year. As a result, any businesses occupying a property this financial year that meets the eligibility criteria will qualify for full business rates relief for the current financial year. 1,007 businesses in the retail, leisure and hospitality sectors have benefited from full rates relief amounting to 10.4 million within the Vale of Glamorgan area. We could move on to the next slide, please, Mark. The most recent scheme was only recently announced and again was to do with the national lockdown. The Welsh Government introduced a lockdown non-domestic grant to help businesses survive the economic consequences of the national firebreak lockdown in Wales. There were various elements to this scheme, so I'll just run through those. Grant 1 was a grant of £5,000 and is available for businesses operating in the retail, leisure and hospitality sectors, occupying properties with an RV of between 12,001 and 51,000 and which were forced to close. The main difference between this scheme and the initial lockdown scheme is that this grant only applies to businesses forced to close. Grant 2 was a grant of £1,000 and was available to all businesses eligible for small business rates relief with a rateable value of between 12,000, with a rateable value of 12,000 or less. The grants again were limited to a maximum of 2 per organisation. This grant scheme mirrored the qualifying conditions of the initial grant scheme in March. However, with this particular grant scheme, there were 2 top-up grants. The first top-up grant was a grant of £1,000 available to businesses eligible for small business rates relief that were subject to local restrictions who had been impacted by a 50% reduction in their turnover. The Vale of Glamorgan entered into a local lockdown on the 28th of September 2020, and any businesses that experienced a 50% reduction in turnover as a result of local restrictions were eligible for the additional £1,000 grant. Grant 2 was a £1,000 grant. Grant 1 was a grant of £5,000, which was available for businesses operating in the retail, leisure and hospitality sector. And as I say, these were ones that entered into local lockdown. So then the top-up grant 2 was a grant of £2,000 available to businesses eligible for small business rates relief who were forced to close. As a result, under the current scheme, a business could qualify for a grant of up to £5,000 depending on their individual circumstances. The grant scheme opened on the 28th of October 2020 and will close on the 20th of November, so this Friday. The council sent letters and emails to all businesses that may potentially qualify when the scheme opened, and a reminder was sent last Friday. There is a social media countdown also operating on a daily basis to encourage businesses to apply, and an email was issued to all councillors to encourage take-up by local businesses. The 1,293 grants have currently been paid for a total of £4 million. 212 businesses have been supported under Grant 1 and 1,081 under Grant 2. As of today, 68 applications remain outstanding, of which 20 were received yesterday and today, and 48 are awaiting further information from either the customer or the Valuation Office agency before payment can be considered. As the scheme closes this Friday at 5 p.m, then it is imperative that any local businesses that are yet to apply submit an application for consideration. So that's a very brief overview of those schemes. I'll now pass you on to Phil to discuss the other grant support that has been available.
Thanks, Paul. So Mark, if you're happy to flick one on, that would be great. One slide on. Thanks for that. So I'm kind of going to run through some of the other grants that I think have evolved as we've gone. So I think all local authorities in Wales have worked really closely with Business Wales to fine-tune what these grants will look like through the process. And as it's gone, we've realised that certain people are falling through the nets. So I think, for example, we'll talk about creative freelancer in a minute, but we're finding, some certain types of businesses particularly are falling through the net. So what Welsh Government have done through Business Wales is try to design schemes that try and capture as many people as possible And what we're finding is that there are now very few businesses that are falling through every single crack. And then with those businesses, we're kind of trying to work with them. So one of the cracks that some of the businesses fell through initially was the fact that many people were not eligible for the self-employed income support scheme because of the number of years of accounts that you needed. So Welsh Government established this startup grant for newer businesses. And we had an allocation across Wales, which was apportioned across different counties. And I think what we've been able to do throughout this entire process as well is where some counties haven't been spending their money, or there's been a different balance in the type of businesses that are in that county, we're able to distribute the money between ourselves. So we had enough money for 83 grants, 207,500, and they were grants of £2,500. We received 135, of which 53 were rejected, and 82 were approved, which is quite frustrating because I was determined to get to that 83. But it shows that we more or less, we did a lot of chasing, a lot of call outs, and we kind of hit our allocation on the startup grants. That was over the summer. Mark, you okay to flick? Thank you. So the creative freelancer grants, that was established more recently, and again it was kind of co-designed with Creative Wales, which is a division of Welsh Government, so not directly with Business Wales, but this was specifically aimed at supporting sectors that weren't restarting. As we were coming out of lockdown, so the creative freelance, we were funding various. It could be, wig makers, makeup artists, anybody involved in TV, media production, that side of things. So the kind of industries that haven't been able to restart. So this one has surprised me in that we have had a huge amount of interest in it. Cardiff and the Vale were very oversubscribed, and I think we allocated it in two 50% chunks, and I think on the second chunk we opened about 10 o'clock and we were almost fully subscribed by 10:30. So it's been incredibly popular. But what we're grateful for to Creative Wales, actually, we let the applications come in. We were oversubscribed on that day when we opened by 72 applications. So Welsh Government agreed to reallocate some of the underspend from other areas, which might not have as many creative freelancers, to us. So it's been good that we've been able to fund those additional 72. On top of that, we got 56 that are registered an interest for the next round, and the next round launches on Monday. And there's about, I think it's 3.5 million available across the whole of Wales for that. So Cardiff and the Vale definitely have had a fair share of this, and it's highlighted how many creative freelancers live in the Vale. Next slide. Thank you, Mark. So this is the discretionary grants that we've been running and kind of at the same time, and we've been liaising a lot with the rates team on this, where the latest rates grant as a result of the firebreak lockdown are really there to support businesses that have got rated premises that have had to close or seen a downturn, whereas this one was really for those businesses that have not got a rated premises or who have fallen through a crack. So really diverse range. Our allocation was £600,250. The one downside of this was that I think if we had our time again, we would not launch all the grant schemes at the same time, because Welsh Government launched their Economic Resilience Fund and the rates funding and this all at the same time. So for businesses, that was quite confusing. So I think that's a lesson learned. But the allocation was 600,250, and where people have applied to the wrong fund, we've just been able to say that we need to switch them. The application process was very simple, light touch. I think with these processes, this grant particularly, we've asked people to self-declare, and a percentage of those grants will then be audited. Where we've got concerns or wanted to look further, we have been asking for more information. There's quite a large team kind of looking at this. So that's for grants of up to £1,500 or £2,000. It depends on your drop of turnover or whether you've been forced to close. So the criteria for this are quite, strict in that you've got to declare that you've had an 80% drop in turnover. So it could be a, driving instructor, a hairdresser that might rent a chair, but they don't rent the whole shop, or a tattoo artist. Generally, people that have fallen through those kind of cracks. So as of yesterday, we have approved 63 grants, and I think we're in discussions with Welsh Government and WRGA coming up about whether or not there's a opportunity to reapportion some of the money between all of the latest lockdown money. So we're letting applications still come in. I'd say we've kind of hit our maximum, but we're sending people out. We're still letting people apply, and going to say to them, look, you're on a reserve list, a bit like we did with the Creative Freelancer grant. So those are all the grants that we've been running. Just the last slide, if that's okay, Mark. So Welsh Government Economic Resilience Funding. So this is the third round that's recently closed, and I think there's been some confusion in that people think that the council is running it, but we're not. So we've had a lot of queries from businesses about getting through the process, and we're dealing with Welsh Government on their behalf on the day of the funding when it was announced. But the number of businesses that applied for this far outstripped what I think any of us were expecting. So it had to close very quickly after the number of thousands of applications it has had in. And I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding in that some businesses that applied for this thought that it was about keeping core costs going, whereas actually it was about adding resilience to your business through either whether it's new software, new equipment, diversification. So we're in touch with a lot of the businesses in the Vale that have applied for this, and a lot of people found it very frustrating. So Welsh Government have allocated more money now to a fourth round, and we don't have the date of when that's going to be launched yet, but a fourth round, which will be a more simple process, we understand. So we have regular meetings with Business Wales and all the other local authorities. So we hope to be able to share that with the businesses in the Vale as soon as it's launched. Any questions for Paul or I?
Gwyn?
Just quickly, Phil, have there been many applications from Landford Major?
Lots and lots.
That's good. That's great. Thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
We had a strong one thing that was notable. We had a strong concentration of creative freelancers in Penarth. Something about Penarth.
We're so creative.
So creative.
Does anybody else have a question? Obviously, if there are any particular questions about particular businesses, if you can send those directly to Marcus's team and not bring them up here. But are there any sort of particular questions to Phil or Paul on the presentation? Andy, can you hear us?
Yeah, yeah. Could I just ask what the situation was with farms? I can understand why farms might not have been offered assistance, but were farms offered assistance?
Did you hear that, Phil?
Yes. I understand that Leslie Griffiths, who's the Minister for Rural Affairs, had a separate support package for farms. But I can find that out for you.
It wasn't administered by us, was it, Phil?
Thank you.
No.
Okay.
Are there any other
you.
questions from members before Liz has indicated that she wants to speak? Any other questions? So Phil, I had one question. So those businesses that are not successful in the grants, in any of the grants, what sort of advice are we giving advice? Are we kind of signposting them?
Yeah, and I think we're generally keeping them on our books. So, for example, where people haven't been successful in the by the time we were running the startup grant and the creative freelancer grant, we were in the process of sort of co-developing the discretionary grant, where we were pulling together bundles of businesses saying, in this sector they particularly.
I'll try and fill in. I'll try and fill in for him. Yeah.
My audio's, is that just Phil that's gone?
I think
he's back. He's back.
I'm back on now. Phil, sorry, you froze.
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Sorry, I got kicked out by the VPN, but I was just saying before I get kicked out again, we were trying to identify specific sectors that had fallen through the cracks. So, for example, a big one for us was the self-catering industry in the Vale, where businesses may not pay rates. So that was included in the discretionary one. But there are not many I can think of that have completely fallen through the cracks.
Yeah, it does seem like it's been covered. Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Very good. Liz, did you want to come in? I can't see you, but.
Oh, sorry, I am. Oh, don't know what's happened there. Yeah, I just want just a couple of things that I would like to draw attention to. We had a report in Cabinet yesterday where it actually outlined that the total in terms of grants that we've managed, Welsh Government grants that we've managed, is £42.5 million that have been processed by this joint newly formed team between finance and Paul's team and Phil's team, finance and regen. And I think that the turnaround of this has been absolutely phenomenal for two such small teams, because they've carried on doing the day job at the same time. You know, I mean, if you actually look at it, all the exchequer services, all of the finance, all the benefits, all the updates and things that finance normally do, they still did it while still processing this level of grant funding, and absolute hats off to them. Ruby, you asked about whether or not, you know, anything else was done to support businesses. I personally know that they were not just keeping people on the books, they were actually talking to people about their business model, looking at whether or not there were ways that they could be supported elsewhere, talking about, there was one business, could they go on to collecting weekly rather than monthly, because that was causing a cash flow issue. Lots and lots of advice was going out to businesses that was not on there. And also when they identified glitches in the system, then they were lobbying Welsh Government officials, they were feeding that back into the system, and part of that information going back in the system is why there have been tweaks and there have been grant streams that are Wales specific that have come out for businesses in Wales, and businesses in the Vale have benefited from that. So I think, I mean, hidden in the huge amount of information that Paul presented, to turn around £14 million in the first 2 weeks, that is absolutely phenomenal from a standing start, plus putting together the website so that people had up-to-date information that they could go to. As I said, we had the website up literally within 24 hours of the announcement, and on the days that they went live, and we had people there. So I just want to say, from me, an absolutely huge thank you to both of the teams for a phenomenal performance and turnaround. So huge thanks.
Thanks, Liz. No, it is. I mean, it's a huge amount of money, and you know, the fact that, you know, the grants that the Welsh Government dished out, and that we were you know, giving out to businesses, and when we're working with businesses, you know, that whole work to make sure that those businesses weren't falling through the cracks is tremendous. And you're absolutely right, Liz. It's, you know, and it is a very Welsh specific way of you know, helping businesses in Wales. So that's something to be very proud of, I think. I had one little question, Phil, which might not be a question for you really, but I was just curious. Do you know about this £500 for self-isolation? Do we know how that's going on, how that's being administered? Marcus, thank you. I know that's not directly to do with this, but I'm just curious.
Paul knows. Do you, Paul? Paul knows. Paul can answer.
Yeah, that's being dealt with by the benefits section, Ruba.
Right.
The form went live yesterday, so it's already on our website. Again,
Perfect.
we received the final guidance very late, but everything went live yesterday, so customers can now, individuals can apply for the £500 isolation payment.
Brilliant. Oh, Vince.
Vice Chair, Councillor Driscoll has had his hand
Yeah,
up
I was just saying,
times.
I can't hear him though.
Thanks, ma'am. Yeah, just from experience of talking to traders and businesses, some of the businesses, COVID has been and the lockdown has been extremely profitable, and yet they've still sort of managed to get grants, which that's good luck to them. I'm just wondering if you're sort of keeping records and doing surveys and information on all the businesses, in case this happens again, in which case the grants could maybe more focused on businesses that really do suffer, as opposed to businesses that will actually come out of this smiling.
Who would like to answer that?
Well, I can have a go. I suppose it's hard to sort of, with the benefit of hindsight, know who was going to suffer and who was going to flourish. We saw some examples of where we had pubs that were struggling, and then all of a sudden they were doing sort of 150 takeaway Sunday meals. And that's great because it's led to their business sort of diversifying, and kind of that's what the point of the new ERF funding is as well, to get people to change their business model, look at software to make them more efficient. And I think it would have been impossible to run a scheme that only targeted the people that have been I mean, the good thing about the grants for the rates grants was that it was at the very beginning of the pandemic when people were most suffering, and it was everybody had to close. So it was a way of getting money into those businesses to keep them afloat and get them survive. It was sort of furlough was then kicking in and whatnot. But I do think the new grants that have been coming out, such as the discretionary grant and the startup grant, have actually made people have had to prove that they are disadvantaged. So I said in the discretionary grant, you have to have seen an 80% drop in your turnover compared to the same time last year. So it is quite, it's for the people that are really suffering. And I think it's fair to say that the rates grants were designed to get as much money out there as possible. The UK government scheme was replicated by the Welsh government exactly, and it was a way of getting a lot of money into the system for for businesses that were suffering, but you could not, wouldn't have had the time to identify the ones that weren't suffering from that. And for businesses that haven't been suffering as badly, a lot of the ones we've talked to have reinvested it in their facilities, whether it's to do with reinvesting it into COVID measures, buying new equipment, building extensions or whatever. So a lot of businesses that have not needed to use it to keep themselves afloat have reinvested it into the business, which means that they haven't needed to apply for ERF money for the extension or the new software. So I'm not really concerned as such about businesses. It's about making the economy being resilient when we come out of this, I suppose.
And there isn't actually, I mean, I haven't, certainly in my day job, haven't seen much anecdotal evidence of companies profiteering from, profiteering from having, grants and things. In fact, it's kind of the opposite, as you say, people trying to, keep afloat and keep jobs, very importantly, going in their local businesses.
Paul's
okay, yes. So thank you both very much for that.
And I just wanted one last thing to add to what Phil said. As Phil said, on this latest round of grants, the Welsh Government have been a lot more specific in, even with the ones linked to non-domestic rates, we're looking at businesses who were forced to close, who are getting the larger grants, and then the top-up grants as well. We're looking at businesses which saw a reduction in turnover. So it was a little bit more specific in the second round of grants.
It was 50%, wasn't it, Paul, in the NDR grants?
50% for the NNDR grants, yes, whereas it was 80% for the discretionary.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. Well, thank you both for that. That was really helpful and informative. So thank you both very much.
Great, thanks.
So next item, is that you, Marcus? You leading this?
It is, yes. Thanks, Chair. Yes.
So our monitoring report for the local development plan. So over to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Ruba. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is a report which was presented to Cabinet following the preparation of the annual monitoring report. The annual monitoring report has to be prepared every year, but this year, in fact, Welsh Government had said that councils didn't need to prepare it. However, it is a useful tool. We decided to prepare it, and the other key point is that actually the review of the local development plan will start before the next annual monitoring report. So we just wanted to flag up that currently the plan was on target before the actual review of the plan was undertaken. So the key things to note here are that I just drop down to the appendix which goes with the report. Excuse me, I'm just skipping through to the next page. Never goes very quickly, does it, when you're presenting it? Out of 61 measures which measure the performance, bear with me as I get to it. Yes, so out of, what was it, 61? Yes, 61 indicators. There are 59 which require no further action and are green as rated by the assessment. 2 which require further investigation and where comparison with adjacent LPA may be required, and all other measures are considered to be proceeding in accordance with the LDP. So it's a good monitoring report. Issues such as housing, just to point that out, we are actually ahead of target of where the LDP says we should be for 1st of April 2020. One area which is being looked at is employment land, because we are slightly behind target there, but that is a difficult one to actually measure halfway through a plan, and of course will ultimately probably be affected by the COVID situation now, as will the retail issue and the possible loss of retail space in some of the town centres. So that will all have to be built into the next review of the plan. But other than that, I'm quite happy to take questions on it. The conclusion is that the annual monitoring report would not trigger an early review. Obviously, that's a bit superfluous because we are going to have to start the review anyway by legislation before the next annual monitoring report. But this report hasn't triggered an early review of the plan. You're on mute, Rube. Chair, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Sorry. So Andy had his message for a question first, and then Gwyn. So Andy, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What I'd like to ask is about the impending LDP review, which I think is due to go to Cabinet in June next year. How thoroughgoing will that review be, and what will be the opportunity for actually making minor changes to the LDP as it was published in 2017, for instance, including new infrastructure projects, etc.?
Okay, that's
Gwyn,
a very
do you
good
want to take
question.
both questions first, Marcus? Gwyn, do you want to ask your question as well?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Marcus, I'd like to go to page 16 of the actual report. It's 2.3.5. It's about the LDP sustainability objectives. You're on mute.
Sorry, page 16 of the actual appendix.
On the actual report, yeah. Page 16, and it's 2.3.5. LDP sustainability objectives. what I wanted to ask you is, where are we on these at the moment? Have we achieved any of these completely, or have we got many outstanding? I was particularly interested on number 6 there, to minimise the causes and manage the effects of climate change, and to protect and enhance the built and natural environment. And I was going to ask you a question, number 15, to promote appropriate tourism. What is appropriate tourism? Thank you.
Okay,
Marcus,
thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll start with Andy's and Councillor Robertson's and move on to Councillor Johns. Councillor Robertson, the review, it's a good question. The review is something that has to be undertaken by law 4 years after a plan is adopted. The review and how wide it goes will be very much dependent on how the plan is currently performing. So any review can't actually is not intended to be a root and branch review of the plan unless there are specific issues which are thrown up to be, if you like, failing as part of the plan. So, for example, were housing not being delivered at the level the plan indicated it would be delivered at, we may have to look at sites which are allocated in the plan, see if they're ever going to come forward, and actually look to allocate new sites, for example, if that wasn't the case. Or you mentioned infrastructure. If we were looking at infrastructure proposals which were in a plan and which either weren't likely to be delivered or had appeared on the horizon because of national or other reasons, then those would have to be assessed and may have to be included as requirements in the plan. A lot just does depend on how this plan is performing against the backdrop of the things like employment land. So another good example would be if we have a requirement to provide X amount of employment land and we hadn't provided that employment land, or it wasn't looking like it was going to come forward, we may have to allocate new sites for employment. So it's a fairly thorough review, but that review will is essentially takes these monitoring reports a stage further to pick out and specifically address concerns over the lack of provision, let's say, for housing, or the lack of provision for employment land, and it will take account of any new or possibly new infrastructure which would be on the horizon, which wasn't considered to be relevant at the time the plan was first adopted in 2017. So I hope that answers the question. Then moving on to Gwyn's question,
Marcus, I think Andy just wanted to come back on that. Is that okay?
Yeah, come back if you want to.
Do you want to come back on that, Andy?
Yeah, I'd like to. Sorry, Marcus. It's just in what way can councillors actually affect the decisions which are made during the review? I mean, or is it something which is just entirely up to the officers and the cabinet? Can individual councillors actually have an effect here? You know, that's what I'd like to know.
Okay, as a review, there will be a process where consultations will be undertaken. So yes, you can affect change. That will only be, though, within the auspices of the plan. So the plan runs from 2017 to 2026. For example, let's say we were going to allocate new housing as part of that plan because either some sites weren't coming forward or too much housing had been developed early, let's say, and we needed to allocate more housing. Neither of those are actually likely, by the way, because the plan is pretty much on target with all of those figures. But were that to be the case, that process would almost be like a mini LDP. So it would take quite a lot of time. Consultations would have to be undertaken with councillors and back and forth. I mean, if you were, I can't, Andrew, I don't remember if you were actually here when the LDP, you were certainly here when it was adopted. I can't remember if you were a councillor before that time, but it's quite an in-depth process. And yes, the answer is yes, you would be involved in any changes that are made to that plan. They have to be done as part of an LDP type process. So there would be a formal consultation both with councillors, other consultees and other statutory consultees, including town councils, community councils, residents, So it's quite a hefty process if it involves a complete review of the plan. I can't say to you whether it will at the moment. However, what I can say is where we are with the annual monitoring report situation, it is unlikely to need a full review of the plan next year. What will happen is, a bit like this report here, all their various stages will be gone through, including employment, land, housing, and all the other indicators. And if it is shown that a review is needed, then each part will be picked out and we'll have to go through that process separately. And as part of that, you will be able to get involved. But we won't know. The actual process starts next year in I think it's June next year. It will run for some considerable time, at least 12 months after that, until we get to the point where the review is concluded. And that process will be where you'll be able to get involved. Okay. If I move on to Gwyn, no problem. I move on to Gwyn's question. In respect of those various points, those are identified as the sustainability targets. So I'm flicking back because I've got to. I went to Andrew's question. There you go. So those are identified as the LDP sustainability objectives. The vast majority of them are actually ongoing objectives, so they will never really be met. They are targets which continue to be a requirement we have to look at. So, things like I think you picked out minimizing waste, promoting appropriate tourism. They continue to be part of the process, and they won't really ever stop. In terms of what is appropriate tourism, that very much depends on what site we're talking about and where it is. But for example, I'll give you an example of appropriate tourism. That could be the conversion of redundant farm buildings to holiday accommodation. It could be, for example, some limited development around agricultural diversification to allow people to do things related to tourism, perhaps on farms that wouldn't have normally been acceptable some years ago. So it's appropriate tourism would be appropriate within the auspices of the LDP, the local development plan, and what that sets out. And those are quite wide, but there are certain things which wouldn't be appropriate. A good example would be a new caravan site or a new static caravan site in the Heritage Coast. That's not appropriate. That wouldn't meet the terms of the plan. So to sort of round up and answer all that question, the majority of those issues, those items you raised, they're ongoing, protecting the built environment, protecting the available Moorlands culture and heritage. That's an ongoing planning process, which has to happen continuously. They just form part of the sustainability criteria of the LDP, and essentially developments are assessed against those criteria. So I hope that's answered your question. Okay.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
Do any other members have any questions? Well, thank you, Marcus. So I think that was that for noting, Mark? The report, the AMR.
Yeah. In essence, basically, it's been sent back to referred to environment and regen for its consideration, and
it goes back to cabinet.
Yeah, if there's no comments made, then those recommendations stand unaltered, so it'll go back to cabinet.
Yeah,
as is.
Okay, thank you. So then we move to item 6. Is that Marcus? Is that you again?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. This is another reference from Cabinet. It relates to a development brief or supplementary planning guidance, as it's also referred to, for the development of a gateway site into the St Athan enterprise zone, or a port, Bro Tathan, as it is known now by Welsh Government. The report just outlines what the brief sets out to do, which is to set a clear set of principles for the development of the site in question, and to provide a starting point for developers with applications, should they come forward with applications on the site. and to provide a framework against which any planning applications can be assessed. For information, oops, I'll jump too quickly. The development brief was developed for Welsh Government in conjunction with the council by a firm called White Young Green. It deals with only a very small portion of the enterprise zone, which is the entrance really to the zone directly in front of St Athan, where the new junction has been created, and it basically follows both sides of the road as you come into the new enterprise zone there. It is a site which really is relatively small in comparison to the remainder of the enterprise zone, but is quite important because it is a gateway to it, and the requirement there would be for higher quality design and development, which would, if you like, set the scene for the remainder of the site. Clearly, it's really important as well because it actually is the gateway to the Aston Martin site as well. And those of you who have been there would have seen all the work that Aston Martin have done to really improve the look of their site in particular. There is some work, I have to say, to be done for the rest of the Welsh Government's land, but that work is continuing. And really, just to point out that as part of this master plan, the site is suggesting that a hotel could be built within the zone. There could be some very limited retail use and coffee shops, but the majority of the site would be set aside for offices and employment uses. There is reference to a possibility for a garden centre and some medical facilities. They have picked, one important note is that in designing this brief, they have looked back at the history of the site, and some of the suggestions have come from the former Defence Training College, including things like the possibility of a hotel to serve the employment land there. But it is very much, those are very much ancillary uses to the main employment uses proposed for the site. So I haven't got a great deal more to say about it. I don't know if anyone's got any more questions about it. This is a consultation process because it's supplementary planning guidance. A consultation will be undertaken with interested parties, including community councils, town councils. And then comments will be reported back to Cabinet after that consultation process has been undertaken, with any suggested changes that come out of the consultation process.
Thanks, Marcus. So we've got two questions, Gwyn and Andy again. So Gwyn, do you want to kick off? We can't hear you, Gwyn.
There we are. No, you can.
Yeah.
Right. Marcus, I went along to a meeting last year. It might have been earlier this year. The days are so mixed up now. But I went along to a meeting. David George held the meeting. And actually, we were invited because St Athan Community Council actually told David George that we should be there because it's in our ward as such, in the Lantwit County Council ward, not in the Town Council ward. And after that, there was a sort of a sit down and chat about the future of St Athan. I was disappointed at that time to see the number of companies. There was 30 companies on board there, but when I say companies, they were only one-man bands or a couple of people working for them. And obviously, I'm very anxious to see this site developed because obviously this has played a big part in employment in the Western Vale in the past. I worked there myself for 25 years, so not with the RAF, but certainly a civilian company. So I do feel that we feel a bit let down as local members because we've never been invited since. And I understand this advisory group have been kept going, and St Athan have got people on there, but not Lantwit Major. So if you come across David George at all, I would like to pass my message over to him because it's within our ward and we should have some sort of representation. I'm very impressed with the plan. I'll be honest with you, the development brief. The only thing I'm not too keen on is the actual art, public art that they've set up on this brief. I know that this group were considering public art at the time, and I pointed out to them that I'm a former cabinet member for art and culture, and I thought that we would have been invited, but we weren't invited to discuss the public art. But what they put in there, I'm not particularly impressed with. But obviously, you know, we want to see St Arthur moving forward. I probably won't be around when that hotel is built, because it's a 30-year plan. So we can't all be around at that time, I'm afraid. But I am impressed, and I want to see this move forward, because it's important for the whole area for the future. Thank you, Marcus.
So Marcus, should we just take Andy's question as well? Andy?
Thank you, River. Sorry, thank you, Chair. Marcus, I don't want to upset Gwyn here, but in the light of the growing opposition and the growing antipathy towards the idea of the Junction 34 road going down to Roos, which presumably would serve this development as well. Say the opposition groups were successful and that road didn't happen. To what extent would that affect the forward progression of this this project that you've put before us tonight?
Okay,
Thank you,
Marcus.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'll answer Gwyn's first. Yeah, the consultation group which you're referring to, I think was set up by Welsh Government and by their consultants, and not specifically around this work, but more widely around the use of the park, the enterprise zone, I should say. We haven't actually had a part in that. So what I will do, we do have contact with David George via the employment team. So I will mention to him that that group, which has been, I know, liaising with various groups and community councils, that they are aware that Lantwick Major is part of it and should be included in the consultation. So I'll make sure that he is aware of that. This brief itself has come out of quite a long process of discussing proposals, both internally and externally, and speaking to groups like yourself and other community groups. As you rightly say, it is a very well drafted scheme. I know the bit you're talking about in terms of public art, which is the waves that are in the ground, which with people sitting on them, which actually is just a suggestion. And I can recall telling them at the time that that's a bit like mustard. Some people like it, and some, or what's it, mustard or a Marmite. Some people like it, some people don't. So they'd almost be better not putting images in which are just essentially what could happen, if you like. So I think they're flagging up that they'd be very keen to see public art there. They have had somebody do what could be the form of public art there. That would have to be, though, subject to a separate process as set out in our separate SPG on supplementary planning guidance on planning obligations. So I wouldn't worry too much about what's in this brief. It is just making clear that public art will be a necessity as part of the scheme. So,
thank you. Cheers.
Good. Thank you. And as you rightly say, it's a very, apart from that, it is a very well drafted document setting out very clearly what's needed.
Thank you.
Just to come on to, I know Pam's got a hand up, so I'll come on to Andy's comments and then I'll come back to Pam if that's okay. Andy, the site was developed and was in the LDP long before the Junction 34 road ever materialised, and you'll note that actually the LDP doesn't include the Junction 34 actual road in it, although there are references to it. The site has, when it was first included in the LDP, went through a traffic assessment because when the current LDP process requires us to show essentially that we can't just put sites in and then come up with the problems afterwards. We have to show that the site can be developed before it gets into an LDP. So this site, with a possible employment of up to 2,500 people, employment quota, if you like, of up to 2,500 people, was considered as part of that LDP process with no linking road from the M4. So it's not at that point yet. Were, for example, the British Volt development to be successful, at some point it may well exceed that figure. And you know, that might necessitate other, if the road were not considered to be acceptable, wasn't developed, there would be other ameliorating measures that would have to be looked at to overcome that. I mean, we are looking to the future, of course. You know, we are talking constantly to Welsh Government about other sustainable transport measures that could be enacted, both around the airport and the enterprise zone. We're probably looking at the time when electric buses will be running and in the future. So, you know, there are a lot of changes happening around this, but in answer specifically to your question, the site as it stands now, its capacity has been built into the LDP, and the road, the Junction 34 road, is not part of that requirement, if you like.
Thank you,
you had your
Marcus.
hand
That's
up.
good.
Oh, sorry.
That's good news.
Sorry, Andy,
Thank
go.
you.
Sorry, Andy.
No, I just wanted to go back about the public art. I believe in public art, but looking at these pictures, I can't see what they actually represent. I know it's only a potential illustration, but I would like it actually to represent something for the area. I would like to see a Vulcan bomber, you know, sort of pointing up in the air or something like that. But to me, I really couldn't understand what they're supposed to represent. Looks like an ice cream cone upside down.
That's for noting then. Ice cream cone. Got that,
Yeah.
Mark.
Thank you, Pam. I think you're right. I think some of them are a bit like it or lump it, but I think they're very much just intended to be illustrations. They're not
Good.
they're not the final article. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Marcus and everyone. So, Mark, that's for noting as well. And that's the last item on the agenda.
Okay.
So thank you all very much. Oh, Gwyn. Oh, you're saying goodbye.
Sorry, Chair, only a quick one.
Thanks very much, Marcus. Very good explanation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have
So, Mark, sorry, Mark, what did you want to say?
Sorry, Chair, it was only, obviously this has come to us, if there was any, as part of the consultation, anything to go back in terms of comments to the Cabinet, really. So obviously if there's not anything particular, then we can just, obviously this will just go back as part of the wider consultation. I'm right in thinking that, Marcus?
That's correct, Mark, yes.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
does anyone have any specific comments?
I don't think you need to mention my ice cream cones, do you?
Okay. But obviously, if there's anything that the committee wants to put on in terms of commentary, then we can. But if there's not, and the questions have been addressed here, then obviously you'll just go back for the wider consultation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right. Silence, agreement. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks,
So
Chair.
I've got a list of things that I want to bring up next. I have the chair's little prerogative. No, I haven't really. So thank you all very much. The next meeting is on the 15th of December, Mark, I think. 15th.
Yeah.
That's correct, Chair.
Time for lockdown Christmas. Okay,
Okay.
thank you all. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mark. Marcus.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Oh, come off it, fella.